is a Fox News special report.
Good afternoon. I'm Caroline Shively in Washington. We are just a few moments away from hearing the verdict in the first criminal trial of a former president in American history. Donald Trump is about to learn whether a jury of his peers has voted to convict him or clear his name on charges he concealed hush money payments allegedly made on his behalf during the 2016 campaign. Prosecutors made the case that Trump's alleged payments to adult film actress Stormy Daniels were illegal. He is charged with 34 counts of falsifying business records with the intent to commit or conceal other crimes. This morning, as he headed into the courthouse, Trump again ripped into the judge and claimed he had broken no laws. Now we'll learn if the jury agrees or if he'll make history by becoming the first American president to be convicted of a felony. We now join Fox News Channel's coverage of the verdict.
Pecker had a non-prosecution agreement as it relates to the federal election law, and the judge says, I let these in because they go to credibility and because they give you context. Well, anyone who understands Molyneux in New York, which is a case in New York, knows that the federal election violations are not generally considered credibility crimes. Lying and perjury and stealing is. But when the judge says, I give it to you for context, what was really going on here in this case, and we didn't know it until we got to the charge to the jury, was that the judge was signaling to the jury, Michael Cohen, as a matter of law, is aiding and abetting and complicit with Donald Trump in a federal election law violation, which even though I only allowed it for credibility, the truth is he's being charged with aiding and abetting Trump. And so this is a very easy hurdle for the jury to say, yeah, Pecker and Cohen got slammed for it. Should Donald Trump be slammed for it? And plus the issue of not being able to bring in Brad Smith, the issue of not having an adverse charge for a missing witness, that missing witness being the chief financial officer, Alan Weisenberg, who could talk about the fact that as it related to vouchers, invoices, and checks, Donald Cohen had nothing to do with it. There was no testimony about that at all in the transcript. And the one thing that the jurors asked about that meeting at Trump Tower, Donald Trump said 3 times, I don't pay for stories. I don't pay for stories. And the defense made it very clear that this catch and kill wasn't in any of the 3 cases that the prosecution was alleging. A lot of this was smoke and mirrors. I can understand that if a jury makes a decision this quickly, that you know, maybe they bought into the smoke and mirrors. It's very disconcerting at this point.
Our producers inside say that the jury is back in the room, that Judge Merchan is back on the bench. And so we are looking now, it looks like we have some of the verdicts coming in. It is quickly coming in here. From inside, we are starting to hear that there are guilty. There are guilty verdicts. From our producer inside, we're hearing guilty on 1 through 5. 1 through 12, we have now 13, 14 guilty. 15 guilty. You may hear there are a split of folks here who have been protesting on both sides of this case. Some cheer, some boos, as we are now getting the information from the jury. We're up to 18 counts, 19 guilty. Remember, we have 34 here, 20 guilty. And again, these counts were very similar, what they were looking at. It was different occurrences, essentially, of the same crime, a misdemeanor that was elevated by being linked to a felony, to an underlying crime. We are now 24 counts in, all guilty from inside. This is what we are hearing from our producers, up to 26 guilty. Now, remember, each of these counts could maximum have 4 years in jail. President Trump would be considered a first-time offender. These are non-violent crimes. So it seems that it is unlikely the judge would sentence him to prison, but we are now up to 31 counts guilty out of 34. 32 guilty, also coming in from inside the courtroom. Our producers now saying 33 and 34. They're saying guilty on all 34 charges. That is where we are at. The jurors, it looks like we're going to leave for the day. Suddenly we get this verdict. It is 34 guilty counts on all of this. I want to bring in Andy McCarthy, who's here with me, Judge Deneen as well, and Trey Gowdy. Andy, where we go from here, obviously there will automatically be an appeal from this Trump team as quickly as possible. There's the legal issue of sentencing to come. That's going to take maybe months to get to a pretrial report on this and then to a sentencing by the judge. And he reminded the jurors he's the one who decides. But we have the reality now of a former president for the first time being convicted on 34 criminal counts, guilty on all of these counts. Whatever conflict or confusion or questions the jury had, they got that information back to them this morning. And by the end of day 2 of deliberations, we're at 34 guilty counts for the former president of the United States of America.
It's a historic trial of a former president of the United States by his partisan adversaries. Whatever you think of the results, it's inconceivable in New York that anyone else other than Donald Trump would ever been indicted in this way by Alvin Bragg, the elected progressive Democratic district attorney who campaigned on the fact that he would go after Donald Trump, that he had a history of going after Donald Trump. This is a very political exercise, and you have to say that it accomplished what it set out to accomplish. What they wanted was to have a situation where they could call Donald Trump a convicted felon in the run-up to the election. We have an elected Democrat who got that accomplished. He got a very friendly judge who ruled his way on every important thing and turned the jury instructions into a roadmap to conviction. So now I assume, with the mission having been accomplished, we'll have more procedural regularity, Shannon. As you just said, there'll be a pre-sentence investigation. There should be a sentencing scheduled, and we'll go from there. But this case will be appealed, and I hope that there'll be more fairness and equity in the appeal than there was in the trial.
And Trey, when these counts, this indictment first came in, there were a lot of people across the political and legal spectrum who said this feels like the weakest case against President Trump. Something changed along the way. How much of this had to do with the guidance from Judge Merchan, whether it was the jury instructions, whether it was the decisions on objections, whether it was the decision not to let in certain witnesses that the defense wanted to call?
All of the above. The verdict is a necessary and probable consequence of everything that happens up to that point. So that includes jury selection. It includes evidentiary rulings. I was in the courtroom or the overflow room 4 different days. Shannon, it wasn't just the result of Judge Merchan's rulings. The tone of his voice was different depending on which side was doing the objecting. So, you know, look, I said a week ago, juries usually get it right based on the information they're given. When you don't get to hear from an FEC expert, when you hear both proximity and propensity evidence against the defendant, and by that I mean he was close to 2 people who were guilty, therefore he must be guilty, and you hear salacious details with Stormy Daniels. I mean, I didn't ever think it was going to be an acquittal. Having been in the courtroom, I thought it might be a hung jury, 10-2, 11-1. But verdict is only the result of what you're given up until that point. So this is not a surprising result to me.
Okay, so Judge, I want to bring you in here. Obviously, an appeal takes time. It could be months, it could be years. Like Andy said, it may be a long time before that is resolved, however it is resolved. But what that leaves is this White House, the Biden-Harris campaign, free now to call President Trump a convicted felon. I got to say, though, over a year ago when President Trump was asked, will you drop out of this race if convicted, or not convicted, if indicted, he said, no, because I actually think it will help me in my poll numbers. They've done well in fundraising. He's done well in polling. Does this help or hurt now in the public opinion where he's got to get independent voters, where he's got to get people who are not necessarily part of his base, now that he's got this conviction, which may or may not one day be overturned?
You know, Shannon, I don't have the answer to that question. I want to believe that Americans believe in justice, and I think that in their gut, they realize that there is something that is very wrong here. We have gone over a cliff in America. This verdict is a verdict of someone who was forced to fight a 1,000-pound gorilla with both hands tied behind his back. This was a defendant for whom crimes were created, against whom a judge was picked that out of the ordinary, not from the drum, but a judge who was handpicked for this defendant, who denied him the ability to fight the way he needed to fight, who brought in crimes that we've never heard of in New York before, where they had dead misdemeanors that they resurrected into felonies based upon non-unanimous verdicts of crimes that are federal, over which no state court or no state judge or prosecutor has jurisdiction. And in the end, with all the smoke and mirrors and 34 counts and a hooker and a guy, according to a federal judge, is a serial perjurer, we have convicted a former president of the United States of America. We've gone over a cliff. The question as to whether or not America will react to this, whether his numbers will go up or down, I don't know. But I do know what I know. And what I know is that this case is riddled with errors. It is reversible. It will not get through to the appellate division in the First Department in New York, or certainly the Court of Appeals before the next year. And people say, should it go to the Supreme Court? No, it can't go to the Supreme Court unless they exhaust all of the state court appeals. I've spent 32 years in this system, and I am totally disillusioned. You had a judge and you had a DA who literally campaigned on making sure that this president would be indicted. We've got an attorney general who did the same thing. This is a new era in America, and I think it goes against the ilk of who we are as Americans and our faith in the criminal justice system.
So if you're just joining us, 34 counts, 34 in that indictment against President Trump. Today, the jury comes back unanimously convicting him guilty on all 34 counts. They were all similar in that they had to do with falsification of business records. That was what would have been a misdemeanor. That's where the statute of limitations would have run. And there was another underlying crime, which we didn't find out about what that was going to be essentially until the closing arguments and the jury instructions from the judge yesterday. He gave them choices. Trey, we've talked about this many times, that they had choices. Will we ever know what choice the jury made with linking this to an underlying crime?
There are only two ways you'll know that, maybe possibly three. On appeal, arguably, the government could be forced to explain what that second crime was. Maybe it's in the special verdict form and we haven't seen it. It certainly wasn't read to the jury. It wasn't polled. The jury was just polled, which means each individual juror was asked, is this your verdict and still your verdict? We don't know what that secondary crime was. Or a member of the jury could talk. They're not required to. They'll be told that they don't have to, but sometimes members of the jury will talk and they'll say this was that extra crime that we found.
What do you think, Andy? The judge there talks about how people are going to react to this in different ways. You know, we've got a tweet out now from Donald Trump Jr. He says, guilty on all counts, the Democrats have succeeded in their years-long attempt to turn America into a third world blank. November 5th is our last chance to save it. So tough news for the former president legally, but politically, does he get a boost from this on the campaign trail saying, okay, they did what I told you they were going to try to do to me. Now you have to elect me in order to head all of the rest of this off that I predict will come?
Hard for us to gauge as people who were very involved in politics, because I think at this point in the campaign, the people you're trying to reach are the people who aren't all that taken in with politics. For most of the people who are in our world and who follow this closely, I think they're pretty stuck in their positions. And what I've always wondered, and I'm not the political guy, we got a former member of Congress with us here, but I thought that the internal polling of the Democrats has to tell them, it would seem to me, that being able to call Trump a convicted felon in the run-up to the election is worth X number of points in the battleground states. So even if it fires up his base, and it should, and even if Janine, I think, is quite right that this is going to change American prosecution and the American justice system for the worse, because the flag of politicized prosecution has been planted here in a way that it's never been planted before. But as it plays politically, I think the question is, how much is it worth to have that talking point for them in the run-up to the election?
Yeah, and Judge Janine, we think about that in also the context of the fact that if they're, as we've talked about, going to now start referring to former President Trump as convicted felon Donald Trump, and whether they're going to use that language, that we also know Hunter Biden is facing 2 federal trials, which we can talk about as well, one of them starting on Monday, and the fact that I don't think the Trump campaign is going to pull any punches if Hunter Biden winds up convicted of something. It does look to many people across the spectrum here in America that a lot of our political fighting has turned to legal warfare as well.
You know, it's interesting, Shannon. We've been calling it lawfare. I think lawfare is far too soft. It's far too benign. This is warfare. This is the taking down of someone, not just politically, but legally, and looking to take away their civil liberties. And, you know, as a prosecutor and a judge, my job was to make sure that the guilty were convicted and to make sure that their people's civil liberties weren't taken away. I understand the president's coming out.
Okay. Yeah, Judge, if you'll hold on just a second. Sure. We see President Trump now. He is walking out. Let's listen.
Trial by a conflicted judge who was corrupt. It's a rigged trial, a disgrace. They wouldn't give us a venue change. We were at 5% or 6% in this district, in this area. This was a rigged, disgraceful trial. The real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people. And they know what happened here, and everybody knows what happened here. You have a Soros-backed DA and the whole thing. We didn't do a thing wrong. I'm a very innocent man, and it's okay. I'm fighting for our country. I'm fighting for our Constitution. Our whole country is being rigged right now. This was done by the Biden administration in order to wound or hurt an opponent, a political opponent. And I think it's just a disgrace. And we'll keep fighting. We'll fight till the end, and we'll win, because our country's gone to hell. We don't have the same country anymore. We have a divided mess. We're a nation in decline, serious decline. Millions and millions of people pouring into our country right now from prisons and from mental institutions, terrorists, and they're taking over our country. We have a country that's in big trouble. But this was a rigged decision right from day one, with a conflicted judge who should have never been allowed to try this case, never. And we will fight for our Constitution. This is long from over. Thank you very much.
Why should voters vote for a convicted felon?
Are you going to drop out? You believe in the rule of law? You trust the jury? Are you
Once again, on this historic day, former President Donald Trump has just been found guilty on all 34 felony counts of falsifying business records in New York. Class E felonies are punishable by up to 4 years in prison, but legal experts say since Trump is 77 and has no criminal record, jail time is very unlikely. The sentencing will be up to the judge at a hearing on July 11th. Trump has denied all wrongdoing, and he has vowed to appeal. Under U.S. law, the conviction does not mean he's barred from running for or serving as president. This is one of 4 criminal cases brought against Mr. Trump. The other cases involve allegations of election tampering, mishandling of classified documents, and involvement in the Capitol riot. It is unlikely any of those cases will reach the trial stage before the November election. Reporting from Washington, I'm Caroline Shively. For more on this developing story, stay tuned to this Fox News station.
This has been a Fox News special report.